Hi everyone, this CLO video is going to be talking about how we can move around fabric pieces in our 3D window and in our 2D window to get them where we want to be, and then also how to simulate for the first time. So simulating is basically applying gravity and weight and sewing to our 3D window. That is what's going to make our fabric look realistic and be that first step in really sewing and putting our garments together. So first to do this, I'm just gonna add a 3D shape as our avatar. That way we can use this to move our pattern piece around it, just to have something as like a center point here. So in the library, if your library is not already open, you could click on the library tab here or click on the Y button on your keyboard, and that will open your library for you. And I'm gonna go to our avatar folder by double clicking on it. I'm gonna click on the 3D shape folder down here. And I'm just going to add in any of these. We can tell that they're avatars because they are .avt files. So I'm just going to double click on one and it adds to my workspace. If you ever needed to go back a folder in the library, you can always double click on the folder here with the two dots next to it and that would take you back one. But since I've added my 3D shape here as my avatar, I'm going to click this arrow button on my library to close it so I have a little bit more room to work. And if I just rotate around, I'll be able to see what my shape looks like. Whenever we add an avatar to our 3D window, we also get a silhouette of it here in our 2D window. So now that I've added this 3D shape to our 3D window, we have the same flat silhouette of it here in our 2D window also. And so I'm just going to add in a rectangular basic pattern shape to our 2D window here. That way we can practice moving it around in the 3D window. So to do this, I'm going to click on the rectangle pattern creation shape here in our 2D toolbar. It basically just looks like a gray rectangle. When you hover over it, it's blue. If yours is not showing up, you might automatically have the polygon shape tool as your top choice. And so that one looks like a rectangle with a semicircle taken out of it. But to get to the rectangle tool, you'll just hold that down and then click on the rectangle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a rectangle, maybe about the same size as our avatar silhouette here in the 2D window. But it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be exact. We're not doing any specific measurements or anything like that right now. But to create this shape, I'm just going to click and drag. And then when I'm happy with the shape, I'll just release my mouse. And as you can see, I placed mine right on top of the avatar silhouette, right above it in the 2D window. And that's where it created it in our 3D window also. So whenever you create a pattern here in the 2D window, it will place it in the same spot in the 3D window. So for example, I'm just going to create another one over here and then delete it. If I were to place it to the upper left of our avatar silhouette, then it would also place it there in the 3D window too. Since I have that still selected, and I can tell I do because it's highlighted in yellow, I could just click delete on my keyboard to delete that because we just need one pattern piece right now. Or if I had already clicked off of it, I can always click on the edit pattern or transform pattern tool in our 2D toolbar. That would allow me to select this pattern right here, and then I can click delete on my keyboard and it deletes it. But now if I rotate around in the 3D window, you can see we have this pattern piece here just floating. It doesn't look realistic. It's just like kind of like a flat rectangle. And the back of it is a little bit darker, it has a shadow on it. That's showing us that it's the back side of the fabric. The front side is brighter, doesn't have that shadow. But if you did want to remove that shadow and not see that on the back, or if you didn't see it and you wanted to, you can always go into our 3D toolbar on top of the 3D window and hover over the garment rendering style icon, which looks like that roll of fabric that's blue on one side and white on the other. If you're seeing the back shadow on the fabric, letting you know what side of the fabric is the wrong side and what's the right side, then you're in textured surface mode. If you don't want to see the back side of the fabric and you want both of them to look the same, then you'll go to thick textured surface mode, which is that blue roll of fabric that's blue on both sides. Now you can see that shadow's gone. It doesn't really matter right now which one you have it on, but it can be helpful to know what is the back of the fabric when you're arranging a garment around your avatar and first sewing it together. So as we can tell, this pattern piece, it doesn't look very realistic. It's just kind of floating there. But we're going to practice simulating right now to see what happens. We haven't sewn it to anything. We haven't done anything with this. It's not connected to anything. So if gravity were applied, it would probably just fall to the ground. But we're going to turn on simulation and just see what happens. So like I said, simulation is applying gravity to our workspace. And we can apply that simulation by clicking on the simulation button here in the 3D toolbar. It's this arrow pointing down the top left button. When simulation is off, that arrow will be gray. That's when everything will be frozen here. But when simulation mode is on, it will be blue. So I'm going to click it. And you can see our fabric just fell to the ground. Now, when I click it, you'll see that my cursor turns into a hand tool. So I have this hand right here attached to my mouse. If I turn off simulation, my mouse is back to a cursor. Now's when I can practice moving this pattern piece around. If I just click and drag, it will move up exactly how it is. Clicking and dragging it, moving it around. If I turned on simulation again, and it fell to the ground again, and I have this hand tool on my mouse instead of my cursor, I can still practice moving it around, but this time simulation is still applied. So gravity is still applied. So it looks a little bit different when I'm moving it around. I can pick it up and drop it. You can also move it around, kind of moves around our avatar. You can practice like making it interact with your avatar. But I'm going to turn off simulation mode right now. And a shortcut for simulation mode, instead of clicking this arrow every time, we can also just press the space bar on our keyboard, and that will turn simulation mode on and off. So for example, just doing that with my space bar can sometimes be faster. And so what we have been doing is practicing one way to move our pattern piece around just by clicking and dragging. But you might have noticed that sometimes you think that your pattern piece is somewhere in the 3D window, like directly on top of your avatar, but then you rotate and it's actually off to the side. And that's because we don't have much depth perception here in CLO. And so this is why this is one way that we can move around our pattern piece, but it's not the only way that we'll be using. Another way is also using the Gizmo tool. And this is basically the tool that we see when we just click on our pattern piece in the 3D window. And it's these arrows here that pop up. And so this allows us to move our pattern piece up and down by clicking and dragging that green arrow, side to side with the red arrow, and forwards and backwards with the blue arrow. We can also use it to rotate in any direction. Probably the most helpful one here is the blue arrow because it allows us to move the pattern piece forwards and backwards, which we can do just by clicking and dragging, but you'd have to rotate from a couple different angles. So if I wanted to practice moving this pattern piece to make it drape across our 3D shape, right now that might be kind of difficult because it's kind of all crumpled up because we had let it fall to the ground. And I can probably get it there like this through a couple of tries of straightening it out and pulling and adjusting. But if I just wanted to practice moving it in an easier way, I can reset this pattern piece to match exactly how we had it in the 2D window, so when it was created. And so I can do that in a couple of different ways. In the 3D toolbar, I can click Reset 2D Arrangement, and this would reset all of my pattern pieces to be exactly how they were in the 2D window. So you'd only want to use this option if you wanted to reset all of your pattern pieces. So if I click this, you can see it resets it to before we ever simulated. I'm just going to simulate again and then show you the other option. If you had other pattern pieces in your workspace that you had already arranged and set up and styled and they were nice and how you wanted them to stay, and you didn't want to reset everything, you can always right click on one pattern piece, and in your right click menu, click Reset 2D Arrangement Selected underneath Arrangement. That will reset just that one piece. Since we only have one pattern piece in this example, it doesn't really matter which one we click, but both are important to know about. But now I'm just going to practice moving my pattern to get it kind of right on top, hovering over my avatar. That way I can practice moving it around and then simulate, just so you have experience moving around a pattern piece when it's simulated, not simulated, and when it's been recently arranged versus when it has been simulated before. So once I get it kind of hovering on top of my 3D shape, that's my avatar, I'll turn on simulation and you can see it just drapes on top of my 3D shape. So this is just an example. We wouldn't be using this 3D shape as our avatar to create our garments probably, but just an example of how we can practice moving around our pattern pieces, because we're going to be doing that a lot once we are creating a garment here in CLO, moving our pattern pieces around our avatar. So this was just an example of how we can practice that.